In 2020, Stephanie and I, and along with Lauren Gase, formerly from VentureWell, conducted a systematic review of the impacts of STEM entrepreneurial support programs. So we're going to talk about ESPs. I'll probably slip and call them ESPs, but just keep in mind those are entrepreneurial support programs. I have the full citation there, just in case you're interested in it. It's in the journal Entrepreneurship, Education, and Pedagogy with a 2021 publication date. And we're going to be going over kind of what we did for this study and then some of the major findings. And some of them, like Stephanie had mentioned, are a bit concerning about where our field is right now. To frame our study, we used what's called an interactionist model, which comes from IO psychology, industrial organizational psychology. And that an interactionist model looks at person-situation interactions. And so when we were thinking about how to frame the systematic review, and we really wanted to look at the individual impacts of these ESPs, of these entrepreneurial service programs, or support programs, sorry. So when we were thinking about that, we put together this model and thought about the antecedents, the characteristics of the context, and then the outcomes. So to give you a little bit more background, antecedents are kind of those things that are already existing about the person or the situation. So if you have an entrepreneurship program, the students come in, they are who they are. They have certain demographics, they have certain personal characteristics like self-efficacy, motivation, or identity. They may have, and these are just, I did want to state these are just examples. This is not a comprehensive model because there could be many other individual characteristics that might impact outcomes later on, for example. But another individual characteristic might be having a relative who is an entrepreneur, which is often one of the characteristics looked at in the literature. There's also kind of that prior knowledge and experience with entrepreneurship. And then there are characteristics of the context, characteristics of the environment. So these entrepreneurial support programs take place in a broader context. So at a certain university, in a certain regional geographic area, there might be different support structures and resources at the university. And then when we talk about characteristics of the ESP itself, we're talking about, is this a course? Is this a minor? Is it what's often termed an entrepreneurial minded learning course? And that's those EML courses are those when you have like a STEM course, an engineering course that is integrated with elements of entrepreneurship. Or you might have co-curricular experiences, or sometimes also development programs for professionals. So that might be another one. Now, we were focusing primarily in the higher ed domain, or I should say exclusively in the higher ed domain. But there could be things that take place outside of that. For outcomes, this is where our primary research question is based. We really wanted to know, what programs felt were those impacts on the individual, so on the student. What are the changes that they're looking to see as a result of those individuals participating in the ESP? So these are our 4 overarching research questions. I kind of simplified them a little bit just so you didn't have so many words to read on the screen. But the biggest one, like I said, is what are the intended individual outcomes of STEM ESPs? We did also want to know what the context is. So is it a minor? Is it a course? Is it something else? We knew going in that we would see a lot of papers that talked about the outcome being students will have increased entrepreneurial mindset. So kind of knowing that going in, we wanted to also know how people were defining it. And then we wanted to know how they're assessing these outcomes. So what were they doing if they said that entrepreneurial mindset is an outcome? What were they doing for assessment? And then the 4th research question wasn't something we originally had planned to do, but it kind of, we have been working a lot with diversity and inclusion efforts in the Leonard Center, and VentureWell has been also doing a lot of things with diversity. And so we added this question to see also in the broader literature what emphasis was being placed on diversity and inclusion in STEM ESPs. So I won't go into detail on this graphic. It is in the paper, but basically it's how we mapped those research questions to that figure that we just showed before. So most of the questions are relating to the outcomes and impacts, but what the context was is relates to that center column. And then the diversity, equity, inclusion really relates to antecedents, but also could be a little bit with context depending on how it's structured and things like that. I want to conclude this part of our workshop just by reiterating kind of the 4 major findings, and then we're going to go into breakout groups. So number 1 is focus on DEI in the STEM entrepreneurship education literature is very limited. The second thing is that ESPs focus on many different individual outcomes, but they're not clearly defined. And despite the fact that those intended outcomes have strong research bases, the links from in those articles to that research base are very limited, and that the assessment of ESPs don't align or don't connect with the instructional practices that are deployed. Some of the ideas that we came up with, and there's a lot more in the article, and actually some of these things on the screen are not in the article because they're new. But for those of you that do want to tackle this problem personally, the Keene Foundation has partnered with ASEE, American Society for Engineering Education, to create this archival publication authors workshop for engineering educators. It sounds really interesting to me. I'm actually on their advisory board, but if you go to that website, and maybe Stephanie, if you wouldn't mind putting it in the chat, you can apply to be a part of this initial workshop, which is all about networking, collaboration, ideation. And then there are kind of levels of it. So the second level is writing teams that will have a mentor. And so there's apparently a lot of people from Keene are already interested in doing this. So I'm actually super excited to see what comes out of it. The second exciting thing going on, and this is official as of today, so hot off the presses, we have a new NSF project that just got funded in conjunction with VentureWell called Building a Framework to Understand the Impact of Entrepreneurship Support Programs on the Formation of Engineers. And we're really going to be tackling this problem of the access to critical resources in the social sciences. So like, for example, with creativity, what are the critical resources that people writing about creativity might want to be aware of, and some critical definitions and things like that. So we're going to work on that. More will come as we get started because, like I said, this is official as of today. But also, like, other things that people can think about is that I think there's clearly a space to ask funding agencies for support relating to diversity and STEM entrepreneurship. I think this demonstrates that. I did see in the Google document that other people said increased collaborations with social scientists, and then additional resources made available for program leads or practitioners or who are writing these articles.